So guys, are everybody still awake, or yeah, it's the last talk, and this morning Bob said that life is not a machine, life is a drama, and it's the same with networks. Networks are not a machine, networks are a drama. And what I want to talk about is what can we learn from our resilience research to manage this drama? Or is it actually possible to manage it? And when we talk about the drama we are facing in our personal lives and in our business life, in our careers, it's always good to start out with this guy here. We already saw a picture of him this morning. It's Schumpeter, because he was the one. He wasn't the first one, but he's famous for his notion of capitalism as a system of creative destruction. And I'm not necessarily like the notion of destruction. I think it's better to talk about a destructurization process. And that's important because this was one of the things Schumpeter already mentioned. It happens from within, he said, from within the economy. So it's a sort of self-organized phenomena, and usually, and this leads to three fundamental questions. I want to talk a little bit, next 20 minutes. I mean, if life is, and if business life is this dramatic process of a constant process of growth, destructurization, and then you start from scratch, and so on and so on. So it's really, life sometimes really pushes us around, and if you fall asleep somewhere, sooner or later reality will wake you up. The question is, how can we increase the capacity of individuals, of organizations, of cities, of countries, of cultures, to go again and again and again through this adaptive cycle without getting destroyed. Destroyed would mean you're simply, you're not part of the game anymore, or you're in the social world. I would define it as you don't find any place anymore where you can provide value. That's what I would call poverty. If you can't provide value, you're not part of mutual beneficial flows of exchange anymore. So what do we need for that, and what kind of networks are required? And is there a framework? Is there cultural ecology required to get there? So I mean, this is a fundamental socio-political question. It's not just a question of managing an organization, it's a question of managing everything. So usually when we think about this process of creative destruction, we know when diagrams like this is a typical product life cycle diagram. Somebody does research and there's development, and finally this is ready to launch, and there is one day your product is not up to date anymore, and usually those diagrams stop here. Okay, but how do we get from here to here? I mean, there is obviously a gradient, and therefore much better all those ideas we've heard about today already, to think about a product life cycle and the cycle of creative destructurization as a cycle, an adaptive cycle, and you have different authors and different models in ecology who deal with this problem of cycles and in business life. And so what's new is here that you come from a product life cycle is more of an eco cycle. And here the drama is unfolding. The drama is unfolding because I mean, it's dramatic. I mean, you grow and already, this is a shaky road. No, it's not easy to get up there. So it's sort of wiggling and then you're in a major stage and then you're forced to reorganize. From a management perspective, this means that you have different stages, and different stages require completely different management styles and tactics to be aligned with what's going on in the adaptive cycle. And you have not just different strategies, you have different cultures. You know, you have your, as we said, as we heard, you have emergent, the idea of shadow networks, more emergent networks, and then you have an entrepreneurial phase, strategic management, then you run into this phase of constraint, of maturity, crisis, confusion. Confusion means you need a sort of crisis management. I mean, that's not something you can avoid. And then you have completely different types of management styles, strategies that are required that you can sort of navigate through the cycle again and again and again. So it's not an either or. And it's not a choice that we would say, oh, we just need those shadow government-like kinds of networks. This would be a mistake. We need this in a certain phase of the cycle. There are times where you definitely need very, very straightforward top-down approaches. So it's not the question, what do we need and what do we need not? It's always the question, what do we need when? And here, this is what I like when you start to brainstorm. It's not complete, but because when we talk about a drama, you need actors. Each of the stages has its actors. Yeah, let's start with the entrepreneur. Yeah, that's what we like, the pioneer in Silicon Valley. Let's do something. Project makers, adventurers. They say startup guys who say, yeah, we want to change the world. Let's start out with something. And the more you move up or the ascendancy ladder, the more you will see new heroes approaching the scenery. The managers, the conservative traditionalists, the bureaucrats, the engineers, the controllers. So the typical Fortune 500 division guys. But once those guys experience that there is an issue, that there is a crisis, they're looking around and say, okay, well, what are the alternatives? Are there any alternatives? We have a crisis. Our product life cycle is moving to an end. And now the great time of the visionaries, the artists, the philosophers, the dissidents is starting. Why? Why will we need those guys in a healthy ecology? Because they create constantly alternatives. And without an alternative, what should we do? How should we reinvent ourselves if we don't produce alternatives in our innovation ecology? So the philosopher, all those people, nobody would say, we don't need those guys. They are like, no, that's redundant. They are not, I mean, what's their value? In 2008, this was a time where suddenly, at least in one or the other newspaper, new people were heard, and you could read articles from philosophers. I mean, they disappeared again. Now we have the market analysts again, and all those guys are. And now let's see, they produce all those ideas, those shiny ideas and fantastic alternatives. But now you need people who say, okay, let's give it a try. Yeah? The incubators, the enablers, the investors, the mentors, the sponsors, you call them. I mean, it's just funny, just interesting to think about who's where and when do we need which type of actor in this system. And why I want to underline this, if you're managing a system and you want to make it resilient, and my definition and understanding of resiliency was always, it's the persistence of your ability to go through the cycles again and again. This is what I call resiliency. We've heard about, there are other notions where resiliency is something that you stay in the game, you stay sort of within a specific threshold. For me, resilience is the ability to actually cross thresholds and stay, let's say, able to develop and learn and propose whatever your goal function is, which means you stay able to provide value to whoever think that it's valuable. Because if you can't provide value, you never will become part of an autocatalytic cycle. So you have to be able to provide value in which regime ever. That's what I would call it. So resilience management for there is nothing less than the strategies and tactics you have to organize and integrate all those different stages, scales, and functional roles of the adaptive cycle. Organize and integrate. This is something I will come back later, because that's the real difficult thing here, how to keep this together. How to build a house that's big enough that all those guys, how to write a story where all those guys here play their role. That's our challenge. And what we're doing in our society, we always say, oh, no, we don't need them, we don't need them, we don't need them. Whoever you are, always say, no, we don't need this guy. He's an idiot. No, he's just we don't need this guy and this guy and this guy. So our challenge is we have to write a playbook where all those roles are occupied, and then we find somebody who plays the role. If you have an innovation system like a city and you're missing just one of those roles, you have a serious issue, because it strongly affects your capability to, again, reinvent yourself. So therefore, that's resilience management, and I said functional role within to strengthen the capacity, capability, and culture of an agent to explore opportunity and provide value within an existing or new threshold of a specific institution, market, or community, even under critical conditions. It's very long. It's German thinking with those long sentences. I know. Yeah. But it's a definition. I was very proud about it, that I was able to come up with something that sounds like, yeah, that's resilience management. So talking about capacity building, we've learned this morning that capacity is not so much a feature of an individual node, but more the outcome of the overall structure of the network. So if you're not part of an autocatalytical, mutual beneficial cycle, you will never be able to build up capacity. So you have to be part of mutual, positive, cooperative relationships. So therefore, it's always important to look at network structures. And here's the point: what are network structures where you can be mutual beneficial? So where the probability is arising that you become part of one of those win-win games you play in this autocatalytical scenery. And for that we have to look at networks. And here we've already seen this. This is what Lance has shown us before. You have to introduce the idea of the scale within to actually understand what are win-win constellations in a network, and why that. Okay, so things all the phenomena have different scales in the time and space or diagram, and it's the same with cultural phenomena. So a culture is changing. I'm thinking about the Austrian culture. We've heard it this morning about the impact of regimes that have already just 5 minutes. Okay, yeah. Okay, so things have their own cycle, have their own duration. Some things change fast, some things change very, very slow. And this is the same what we do when we look at networks. We develop measures to understand the scale and in the time-space diagram of this affiliation. So think about a global cultural event of the Viennese opera ball. I mean, it's an institution. I mean, it will change probably every, I don't know, 50 years, 100 years, I don't know. I'm no expert on that. Whereas when you think about a local party, local parties come and go, they have different people, so it's a very fast-moving affiliation. The same with like something like American Idol, Starmania, where you create something and it's global, everybody in the United States is talking about it, but it comes and goes. So it's a very fast overturn rate. And you can think about those different kinds of events have sort of stored a different amount of cultural energy because they stick. So the memes have a different level of institutionalization. So, and the same we have like when you think about Facebook in comparison with the grassroots initiative, a local government or federal law. When you have a federal law, I mean, it's there, it's in there, it's written in the law. So all the efforts of all the grassroots all the energy is stored in this one law, and it's there. And this is when you look at networks, when people, this is somebody who's because we're in Austria, I thought I'd bring up an Austrian example because this is a very powerful manager in Austria, and people here know him. He's Christian Konrad, and this is his network. And just to give you a notion, the networks of those guys look like that. They have the capability to create networks at each of those different scales in the time-space diagram. So they have very fast-moving and local stuff going on in the network. They have very slow-moving global contacts. They have local, traditional contacts, and so on. And here is now the point where our research is linked with Balázs model of structural fold networks. Because when you look at the networks of those guys, what you can see is they are able to overlap different networks at different scales of time and space. So that's how they connect the local with the global, the past with the present. So and this makes those guys unbelievably resilient because they have always something that sort of comes into the network, and they have this balance of stabilization and innovation. So this is what we call a cross-scale fold network, and the guys who have a network like that we call a hybrid network because it's a hybrid. And you can do this, and now you can look at different institutions. When you look at Austria, so you have your different agents. So what we do is we look at the institutions and think about the product life cycle. This is our measure to think about the speed of an institution or an organization. So a telecommunication organization is a very fast-moving, product life cycle, whereas an institution, for example, where a federal agency has a much slower product life cycle. And this is what you can do. You can look at who are the guys, who are the institutions that have robust cross-scale links that are, and once again, that are embedded in triangles. So we have actually here cycles, cross-scale cycles in the network of those people. And yeah, this is what we call structural fault network. Now, and since they have those networks, it's highly probable that they also get different players, different functional roles with a completely different role within the adaptive cycle. I mean, this is how they manage the diversity. It's cross-scale diversity. So, yeah, I don't want to go into this one here because I don't have the time. I'm just like want to, because he holds this sheet where we see the word and I have to, because I have to just bring across one final idea if it's possible. The thing about those guys, those cross-scale fault networks, or when I talk about resilience management, the capability to fold and integrate all those different crazy cultures and those different kinds of management styles that are required. Who is doing this job? And why is this so difficult? Why we always play the game of who we need and who we don't need, and this is what I've mentioned before, that all those different roles usually are in conflict with each other and blame each other that nobody needs them, or that it's their fault that something is not working out. The integration of diversity and difference is always two, so in management, you have just two variables. You have just two things you actually can move. The one thing is utility. It's beneficial for those guys to work together. If you are diverse and at different stages in the development cycle, it's highly probable that there is a win-win constellation, because you have complementarity. So you get complementarity through having people at different stages in different phases. Very important aspect. Cross-scale complementarity, and therefore a higher probability for providing value to somebody else. This is just like, okay, we can be beneficial. To be beneficial doesn't necessarily mean that it's an institutionalized form, because it also could be just a deal. And therefore, when we look at networks, we have this really two dimensions, I think, that describe very beautifully different kinds of network cultures. So when you have here, I know somebody and I estimate the expected returns I get from this relationship. So we have common opportunity, or we have common identity. Common identity just means that I think at least that we will meet each other again. So we have an expected number of encounters. And what we know, if you have just a common identity but no common opportunity, it's a private relationship. If you just share opportunity but you have no identity, it's a deal relationship. So it's a very, very fast-moving thing. And what I want to say is adaptive management and integrating all those different aspects of the adaptive cycle always requires both. It needs a sense of that there's value, but it needs also a sense of a common identity. The feeling that we are living in the same building, that we are occupying, that we are stakeholders of the same world and not of a different world. And now it comes back to the thing, the idea of storytelling. Without a strong, strong, strong vision and story that everybody in this house that we're living in plays an absolutely important role in this cycle of renewal. Without this story, you don't have this shadow of the future that's required to invest in the relationship, to work out problems and issues, and therefore, once again, I mean, lack of vision, lack of common vision. I mean, people say, yeah, vision, so idealistic. No. I mean, you can manage a multi-stakeholder networks not just through deal relationships. It's not possible because the deal is not always possible. So therefore, this aspect of vision is so important, and I don't have the time to talk about this one because I think it's now time to finish here. I just want to underline that the idea of managing resilience has something to do that we understand that all those different roles are not just important, but they are mandatory in order to create something that enables us to be adaptive in the long term. And so we have to build, once again, a house where everybody has its place, and one of the shortcomings, and I think one of the problems we have is, or let's say, don't talk about problems. The beautiful thing about thinking using the concepts the ecologists have developed in the last 20 or 30 years is that they give us a framework for really coming up with some very, very robust tools to manage this cycle. Because once again, for me, the key tool, because this is somebody everybody understands, I guess, and policymakers should love it because it makes our life easier to know that everybody at the end has its place, and we have to negotiate how much each of those different functional groups, how much enabled spaces they have and how much resources they have. But it's not a question anymore if we need them. Their ontological status is not questioned.